could never adapt to modern European standards. Another major issue that came across was how these modern female subjects complained that the beggars, vendors, and eunuchs, all bracketed in the same category to which I refer as the informals, should be removed from the suburban rail space since they dirty the environment. Beggars, vendors, and eunuchs all clubbed together highlight how categories of class, caste, and gender interact and play out in such so-called secular public spaces, producing a system of exclusion socially, physically, and aesthetically. It also gives us a sneak peek into the process of segregation of bodies of the informals and the poor, and various scholarship has established how they are perceived as unhygienic, stinking, diseased, malnourished, ill-clothed, criminal, and uncivilized bodies who are yet to evolve or can never evolve as modern. Even the idea of home of the poor is bracketed as unstable, full of filth. These strong differences in the representations of the bodies and the spaces inhabiting these bodies of the rich and the poor, or of the formal and the informal in this context, calls for attention. From the perspectives of the vendors, the interviews highlight the constant sense of insecurity and threat faced by these informals, who at times have to pay weekly fines as high as rupees 1200, which could be their monthly earning, to the police, while the police might just be contented with rupees 120 at another instance. At a third instance, beating up and jailing of these women vendors, irrespective of their age, was also reported. One of the Muslim women hawkers selling handmade jewelry on trains questioned why selling stuff on the trains is illegalized when women from all backgrounds happily buy the earrings, clips, and necklaces offered at 1/10 the prices they have to pay in malls. She then herself replied by saying, most women face problems because of us, and our presence makes them uncomfortable. It is therefore interesting to see who becomes a threat for whom, and whose idea of threat is actually taken seriously by the state. When asked about her background, she mentioned how at the age of 60 she's taking care of her mother who's about to turn 100, of how they're homeless and she lives with her mother in a shelter for the homeless, and how 2 of her brothers died at a construction site due to unsafe working conditions. This point to informality as a much far-reaching concept than work, wherein informals are likely to have their family members engage in other informal activities, children engaging in informal forms of education, informal health access, informal credit systems, and living in informal habitations. Informality therefore becomes a system of socio-spatial marginalization. Role of state in this regard could be seen in using law and regulation as a means to comply with the needs of the so-called formals and to their aesthetic aspirations, deeming even the mere presence of the informals as illegal. Informality and role of state. Coming back to Ananya Roy, she says, as a state of, she conceptualizes informality as a state of deregulation, one where the ownership, use, and purpose of land cannot be fixed and mapped according to any prescribed set of regulations or the law. Indeed, here the law itself is rendered open-ended and subject to multiple interpretations. She asks why some forms of informality are criminalized and rendered illegal, while others enjoy state sanction or even practices of the state. Going back to Gertner, he notes that almost all of Delhi violates some planning or building law, such that much of the construction in the city can be viewed as unauthorized. I now take the case of battery rickshaws in Delhi based on the study conducted by Harding and Rajesh to explore some of these observations. They show how the common perception of battery rickshaws are lawless, unruly, and epidemic, which is constricting and endangering the flow of normal traffic, and they are a menace which adds to the congestion. So, as a result, the Ministry of Road Transport and Highways finally declared e-rickshaws illegal in April 2014, and Delhi government began a crackdown. So the authors attempt to bring in the perspectives of the operators and drivers of this e-rickshaw and the view and what is their view about this regulation or the lack of it, whether it is beneficial for them and or not. So although for these e-rickshaw pullers, obtaining rickshaws is very easy, it is cheaper because they do not need licensing and they do not need the documentation. But again, the socio-economic survey showed that they were traveling as migrants and they were also staying in informal settlements. So it was not possible for them to have address proofs and all. And therefore, that way, the lack of regulation benefited them. But as a result, what happened was that there was increasing instances of theft of these rickshaws, and then which made them even more vulnerable because then they were unable to pay the rent. So they explain how a single battery rickshaw could be sold, stolen, and resold multiple times with the owner having to pay the loan all by himself. Thus, the vulnerability of the workers increase in this regard. So these arrangements in the form of hafta payment shield the hawkers, shield the informals from the laws and policies created by higher levels of state, and this becomes a mechanism through which the informals attempt to gain recognition from the state. The main source of anxiety among both groups is that their activities are subject to a regulatory regime that is predatory, and the predatory state constantly demands ever-increasing bribes and threatens destruction of livelihoods of all those who cannot meet its exacting licensing criteria. So to conclude, I have attempted to show how informality is not just about work and wages, but corresponds to a way of living, social relations, aesthetics, and specifically with respect to law and state. And the major idea has been to identify the discontinuities and heterogeneity within this conceptual category. How informality could sometimes serve as a survival mechanism offered through greater flexibility, or could simply be a form of compulsion with increased sense of insecurity and threat. From the state's perspective, it shows that it's not always a cause and consequence of under-regulation, but even over-regulation in a case of deregulation in this case. So. Finally, about how urban planning is based on this system of aesthetics, which actually has implications on the hierarchical segregation of the so-called informals. Thank you.
Thank you, Akriti Bhatia, for bringing in the role of informal workers and their interaction and regulation or over-regulation of the state, and the placing of these workers in the urban setting. The last listed speaker in the session is Dr. Surendra Kumar.
Emerging trends of urbanization in India and environmental perspectives. This paper. So now, respected chairperson, delegates and my research scholars. So this paper presented, this is my first paper presented. So first on introduction, the independent India has been urbanizing very fast. The process of the urbanization has been closely linked with the process and pattern of the economic development in the country. Though the process of the urbanization in India could not be explained fully by the process of the economic development, it is positively linked with the latter. The rapid increasing in the urbanization and economic development has led to severe environmental degradation, and that undermines the environmental resources base upon which a sustainable development depends. The growing concern is that as the cities grow, large environmental stress multiplies. This is because cities are the very action is the unprecedented growth in the population accompanied by the technological and economic growth has enhanced the urbanization. So main objectives to analyze the trends of urbanization in pre and post reformist periods. Second one, to examine the basic amenities in urban areas like safe drinking water, health facilities, electricity and sanitations. To examine the impact of the growing urbanization on the overall quality of human life. And to examine the impact of the urbanization on environmental factors. To highlight on policy issues of the environmental and government of India on migration from rural to urban areas. Next, hypothesis. The urbanization in India is a consequence of the availability of economic opportunities.
You can skip over hypothesis.
Yes. Urbanization leads to, yes. Next. Databases and methodology. Yes, sir. Yeah. Databases and methodology. The study is based on data collection from the secondary sources, which include various publications by government agencies as well as non-governmental organization bodies. The data from various NSSO rounds and various census register general of the India has been used for the collection of the relevant and reliable statistics. Apart from these various issues of the economic survey, different volumes of statistical outlines of India and various reports of the CMI published from time to time has also been the other source of data collections. Limitations of this study. First of all, the perception about what constitutes essential expenditure as a part of minimum level of living in an urban areas has to change. A minimum of expenditure on housing, health, and education should be considered essential. Second one, further we need to develop a strong database on environmental issues, which our policy framers of the mostly lack. Time series data in this regard is mostly a dream even in the times to come. The study is mainly based on the different censuses reported up to census 2001. However, some estimates of the provisional 2011 census were published when this work was at the stage of the completions. Major findings. According to 2001 census, there are 286 million urban population and 36 metropolitan cities in India. These including Calcutta, Mumbai, Delhi, Chennai, Bangalore, Hyderabad, Ahmedabad, Kanpur, Pune, Nagpur, Lucknow, Jaipur, etc. The second one, the process of urbanization in post-independence period was fastest during 1971-81. The size of urban population increased from 109 billion in 1971 to around 160 billion in 1981. The number of towns increased from 2,590 in 1971 to 3,371 in 1981. The rapid growth of 1 million cities has brought in it is a wake a large set of problems. Rural-urban fringe has emerged around the most of the large cities. Next one, the study also reveals the relationship between the levels of the urbanization and poverty. Usually urban poverty is less than rural poverty. The analysis of the urbanization and the different quality of life among the 16 major states of the country for the census year 1991 and 2001 can easily be inferred that urbanization has led to improvement in the quality of life. Next, suggestions of the study. Pattern of urbanization. Developing this spatial pattern of the urbanization is suited to the socio-economic conditions of the India. Second, urbanization of poverty. It is one of the key features of Indian urbanization. Unplanned urbanization has resulted in the growth of slums in the cities, dividing them into formal and informal settlements. Third one, government incentives. Government should provide health, education, housing, and pension services for rural migrants in urban areas, which is essential for promoting the human capital movement from rural to urban areas or to industrial sector. Fourth, environmental consciousness. The environmental noise levels are to be checked with the prescribed noise standards of the residential, commercial, and industrial areas. If the noise exposure levels are higher, suitable noise control measures like personal protection equipment, installations of the barriers, enclosures, etc. need to be suggested. Last one, conclusion. Urbanization depletes both renewable and non-renewable resources faster because of the excess energy requirements of the urbanities. The increased substitutions of the machines for labor in urban cities and the processing and transporting of the additional food requirements to urban cities creates a excess demand for energy. With urbanization, even the simple matter of waste disposal become a problem. The throwaway societies of cities generate the most trash disposal, which poses a major threat today. The world's leading cities are the polluters are for excellence. Urban pollution may be by the product of the cities, it increasing population energy requirements. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you, Dr. Sundar Kumar. Now, this has left with us some time for discussion.
I am Om Prakash from Christ University, Bangalore. Actually, I would like to share with the dignitaries here some of my experiences. Born and brought up in a typical village. 6 years back, I migrated to one cosmopolitan city for employment. My idea here is to bring to light that what the city life has done to me. First of all, In fact, that 2 years back, I met my physician saying that, told me that actually it is a kind of a stress-related syndrome. You need to do some breathing exercise. And he suggested me there is what thriving spiritual medical industry happening just the outskirts of the city. You can go there. Then after going there, I realized actually the city is not giving me a space to breathe, whereas at the outskirts of the city, the same medico-spiritual industry is compelling me to breathe. This is one experience I got. And the second experience is after coming to the so-called...
You have to breathe.
Yeah, only two more experience, because I could see that in all our presentations. Now, only thing which is eluding is that what does urbanization, we are quantifying in fact, that, but on the other hand, we are forgetting that what urbanization is doing to the quality of life. Even quality of life, even in the morning when during the presentation, we quantified that and said that, okay, happiness index. What happiness index, unless we are talking about what it is doing to the quality of life. I'm talking about how our relationships are becoming so floating and kind of superficial in the urban phase. That's the second point. The third point is that how we are becoming very, urbanization is also about consumerism. So how much we are becoming very conspicuous in our consumption patterns. Do we have any idea that how much we should consume in an urban space? These are the areas where we need to also look into. What it is going to do with our quality of life. When we talk about the happiness index, it is not about quantifying it. It is also to talk about qualitatively what it is actually doing with our quality.
Two points. One, Angula, I really liked your presentation. And the final point you made, which is the absence of an institutional framework governing urban school education, particularly at the primary level and so on. But I've often wondered why there is no study trying to tell us why and how this happened. Because we have the Zilla Parishadiya structure, which was there subdued under SSA and so on for rural policy. But why did the urban structure collapse or became, this absence? Your presentation on informality, just one thing is that in the definition of informality, the two things which I could make out from your definition of informality, one is that you wanted to dissociate it from work. And the second was that you described it, as closely as I could, understand based on Ananya's conception of deregulation. But all the examples that you gave were with respect to work and with respect to forms of regulation. Negative impact, or whatever you would like to call it, but certainly forms of regulation. So, the work that you, sort of the examples that you gave didn't seem to fall outside the general definition. But and then the other observation is that you talk about, you said that there's a homogeneous definition of the informal sector. Nobody who's read the NCUS report, and which you seem to have done, and has seen how it puts the informal sector through a lens.
But now with the change in the quality of the composition of swage, Calcutta swage, fish cultivation is no more remunerative. So the people are leaving their livelihood. So now the wetlands are there, but as there are, previously there were contentions from the fishermen cooperative and others to preserve the wetland. But as now people are leaving those livelihoods, there is nobody to talk for wetlands except for the environmentalists. The people who dependent on the wetlands are no more concerned about the wetland. They want to leave it. They want to leave it, and that is making more space for the land-hungry promoters and others.
Dr. Reddy, your presentation was very good. You have, one of the problems that you have pointed out is segmentation. Very high fees, private schools, few, and people with very high income sending. An associated problem, but much more severe in nature, which is emerging in urban schools particularly, is segregation. Not just segmentation of a few elites, but complete segregation by classes. A few years back, I was looking at the data collected through a survey from 12 MCD schools in Delhi. And they were very well endowed schools, because government schools in Delhi have a lot of land, they have all the resources, They have the most qualified teachers, better qualified than private schools, PhDs and all that. And yet, in all these 12 schools, children's father's background was driver, peon, watchman, laborer. The highest paid were drivers. No white-collar job parents would send child to a municipal MCD school, even though it is very well. This type of segregation, a school in Andrewsganj, a locality as posh as Andrews, exactly the same pattern even there. Not just, I'm talking of fringes of Delhi, but center of Delhi, Andrewsganj is near South Extension. So this is a problem with severe implications for the society. It's something like a segregation of black and white. Yeah. So I think this needs to be studied and brought out very clearly.
I have two quick comments. First one is about Ritesh Kumar's presentation. I'm sorry, I'm going to be actually picking up on one of the throwaway comments which probably was made in a bit of jest, that this is about an exclusion of the environment, right? And while we are talking about exclusion of social exclusion constantly, we're not talking about exclusion of the environment. My own experience in struggling with many of these issues is that we still haven't quite figured out what are the categories that will allow us to think about society and space, or society and nature, together in the same framework. So we keep constantly looking at two different conceptual frameworks. One deals with environment, one deals with society. There has to be a conceptual language, a categorical language that allows us to bring the two together. I think that the theoretical work has been done, but the actual empirical research has not been done adequately in India. So I'd actually like to hear a little bit more about your experience in that, because there have been many attempts to do that in Indian cities. The second comment I had is actually about Anugula's presentation. I really enjoyed your presentation. I think it's very insightful and it highlights many of the issues. But